The city was a sprawling network of light and shadow, a testament to ambition cast in steel and glass. At its very heart stood the Thorn Dynamics Tower, a shard of obsidian piercing the clouds, a monument to the woman who commanded it from the highest floor. Cassandra Thorn did not command it. She haunted it. From her penthouse office, the city below looked like a circuit board, its millions of lives reduced to predictable, pulsing currents of light. It was a view she had inherited, a kingdom built by a father whose shadow was longer and colder than the one the tower cast at dusk. She was surrounded by immense, sterile luxury. The desk was a slab of polished marble, cold to the touch. The air was filtered, silent, devoid of any scent save for the faint, antiseptic smell of wealth. Emptiness was a permanent resident in these rooms. It sat with her in the minimalist leather chair. It looked over her shoulder at the glowing stock tickers that were her only companions. She was 29 years old, a billionaire, the lauded genius behind a tech empire. She was also profoundly, achingly alone. Her life was a series of scheduled interactions, of boardroom battles where she wore a mask of icy composure, a mask she had forgotten how to remove. The warmth of genuine human connection was a foreign country she had only read about in books. Grief was the architect of her solitude. The accident that had claimed her parents 5 years prior had not just made her an orphan, it had made her a queen on a desolate throne. It had cracked something deep inside her, a fissure that all the money in the world could not fill. She often worked late, long after the hum of commerce had faded from the floors below. The silence was a kind of solace, a blanket woven from the absence of expectation. Tonight, the silence was heavier than usual, pressing in on her as she stared at the schematics for a new satellite network. It was brilliant work. It was meaningless. Her reflection in the panoramic window was a ghost superimposed over the glittering city. A woman with everything, who felt nothing. Far below, in the cavernous, deserted lobby, Leo Vance began his shift. His world was not one of glass and sky, but of marble floors and the lingering echoes of the day's frantic energy. He was a creature of the night, a janitor, the invisible man who made the monument pristine again before the sun rose. His kingdom was one of quiet dignity. The rhythmic swish of his mop, the low whir of the floor buffer, the solitary click of his boots on the polished stone, these were the sounds of his life. He found a strange peace in the emptiness of the building. It was a place where he could think, where the noise of his own struggles could be muted for a few hours. Leo was a single father. That was the core of his identity, the engine that drove him through the exhaustion and the loneliness of the night shift. In the worn breast pocket of his uniform, tucked beside a small, multi-tool gadget, was a folded, creased photograph of his daughter, Lily. Her smile was a sunbeam in the sterile, fluorescent world of his work. He was weary. A deep, bone-deep weariness that came from juggling daycare drop-offs, parent-teacher conferences, and these long, solitary nights. He had once been an apprentice engineer, a man who loved the logic and challenge of making things work. But life, in its cruel and unpredictable way, had dismantled his dreams piece by piece after his wife, Maria, had gotten sick. Her loss left a hollowness in his chest that only Lily's laughter could temporarily fill. Now, his hands, once destined to build circuits and design machinery, wielded a mop and pushed a trash cart. He did not resent his work. It was honest. It fed his child. That was enough. But sometimes, in the dead of night, as he cleaned the gleaming glass doors of a boardroom, he would see his own tired reflection. A man haunted by what might have been, a ghost of a different kind, walking the halls of a world that was not his own. The storm broke just after midnight. A violent, weeping slash of rain and wind that threw itself against the tower's glass skin. Cassandra felt a tremor of something unfamiliar. A flicker of anxiety. The building, usually a bastion of silent stability, seemed to groan under the assault. She decided to leave. The schematics could wait. The emptiness would be here tomorrow. She gathered her things, her movements precise and economical. She walked through the silent, darkened executive floor to her private elevator, the express lift that connected her penthouse office directly to the executive garage. It was another symbol of her isolation, a steel box that allowed her to enter and exit her own company without ever having to encounter another soul. She stepped inside. The doors slid shut with a smooth, expensive sigh, sealing her in. She pressed the button for the garage. Nothing happened. She pressed it again, a flicker of irritation rising. The panel remained dark. She pressed the lobby button. The ground floor. The emergency call button. Silence. The elevator, a masterpiece of German engineering, her private conveyance, was dead. A sudden, visceral jolt of panic, cold and sharp, shot through her. The walls, usually symbols of her power and privacy, suddenly felt like the sides of a coffin. The filtered air seemed to thin, to grow heavy and hard to breathe. The icy composure she wore like armor began to crack. She was trapped. Down on the 34th floor, Leo was methodically cleaning the offices. The storm raged outside, a distant, muffled fury. As he emptied a wastebasket, he heard something. A faint, metallic sound. A thump. It was out of place in the building's nocturnal rhythm. He paused, head cocked, listening. Most people would have ignored it. A building this size made strange noises. But Leo was a man who paid attention to the small details. It was how he'd learned to be a good father, a good man. You listened for the things left unsaid, the noises beneath the noise. There it was again. A frantic, rhythmic banging. It was coming from the executive elevator shaft. He followed the sound, his footsteps quickening. He stood before the gleaming steel doors of the private lift, a conveyance he had never used, had never been permitted to use. The banging was louder here, desperate. Someone was in there. His first instinct was to call security, to follow protocol. But he remembered the briefing from earlier in the week. The storm had knocked out several communication relays. The landlines were down, and the emergency call system was likely routed through the same failed hub. He could try his cell, but service was spotty deep inside the building's core. He put his ear to the cold steel. Hello? Is anyone in there? A voice came back, strained and sharp. Yes. I'm trapped. The power is out. It was a woman's voice. Fear sharpened the edges of her authority. Leo didn't know who she was. An executive working late. A lawyer. It didn't matter. She was a person in trouble. Okay, just stay calm, he said, his own voice steady and reassuring. It was the same tone he used when Lily woke up from a bad dream. I'm going to try to get you out. Inside the elevator, Cassandra leaned her head against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. The anonymous voice was a lifeline. The sheer calm in it was an anchor in the swirling sea of her panic. She took a shaky breath. The panel is completely dead. Nothing is working. I know, Leo's voice came back, muffled but clear. The storm must have caused a surge. I'm going to check the service panel. He jogged to the nearby maintenance closet, retrieving a heavy-duty flashlight and his own set of tools, not the company-issued ones, but the worn, trusted tools he'd kept from his engineering days. He found the access panel for the elevator's manual override. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. He didn't hesitate. He took a small, specialized pick from his multi-tool, a gadget he'd bought at a flea market years ago. It was a skill he had learned as a young apprentice, a trick for dealing with stubborn old equipment. Within a minute, he felt the lock give way with a quiet click. Inside was a complex web of wires and levers. To most, it would be gibberish. To Leo, it was a language he understood. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the diagnostic chart pasted to the inside of the door. He saw the problem almost immediately. A primary relay had tripped, a fail-safe that had failed. Resetting it required a specific sequence. "I'm working on it," he called out. "It might take a minute." "Just get me out of here," she replied, the desperation more naked now. He worked with a focused intensity. His hands, so often used for mundane tasks, moved with an old, familiar grace. He bypassed the fried circuit, his fingers deftly manipulating the levers in the correct order. It was like solving a puzzle, a feeling he had not experienced in years. For a moment, he wasn't a janitor. He was an engineer. He was the man he was supposed to be. There was a loud clunk from deep within the shaft, and then the hum of restored power. The lights inside the elevator car flickered on. The doors slid open. Cassandra stumbled out, blinking in the sudden light of the hallway. She saw her rescuer. A man in a simple gray janitor's uniform, his face smudged with a bit of grease from the panel. He had a weathered, kind face, with lines of exhaustion around his eyes that couldn't hide their intelligence. He held a flashlight in one hand and a small, intricate tool in the other. She stared at him, taking in the sight. This man, this anonymous cleaner, had just done what her multi-million-dollar emergency systems could not. He had done it with his hands, with a quiet competence that was utterly at odds with his station. A wave of relief so powerful it left her dizzy washed over her. It was followed by a flicker of her old self, the CEO. "You should have called building services," she said, her voice still shaky but regaining its authoritative edge. Leo met her gaze, his expression unreadable. He didn't flinch. He simply nodded. "The lines are down, ma'am." The storm, he began packing his tools away, his movements economical and precise. He had done the job. It was over. Cassandra started, unsure of what to say. Thank you felt inadequate. A reward felt crass. She was accustomed to transactions, to quantifying everything in terms of value. What was the value of this man's simple, effective kindness? "What's your name?" "Leo Vance." "Well, Leo Vance," she said, her voice softening. "You have my gratitude." She reached for her purse, a motion as instinctive as breathing. Money was how she solved problems, how she expressed thanks. He saw the gesture and held up a hand, a small, almost imperceptible motion. "Not necessary, ma'am. I was just helping." He turned and began to walk away, his job done, ready to return to the shadows and the solitude of his work. Something in his quiet dignity stopped her cold. He had not asked for anything. He had not seemed impressed by her, though he must have known she was an executive to be on this floor. He had simply seen a person in need and helped. It was a transaction utterly devoid of ambition or self-interest. It was pure. "Wait," she called out. He stopped and turned back, his expression patient. Cassandra found herself at a loss for words. The experience had shaken her, cracking the foundation of her controlled world. This man, with his calm voice and capable hands, had been a rock in her moment of terror. Now, in the stark fluorescent light of the hallway, he was just a janitor walking away. And for some reason she could not explain, that felt wrong. She couldn't let it end there. The encounter had stirred something in the frozen depths of her chest. A flicker of warmth. A spark of curiosity. The next day, she sat in her office, the memory of the elevator replaying in her mind. It wasn't the fear she remembered most clearly, but the janitor's calm. Leo Vance. She said his name aloud to the empty room. It felt solid, real. She did something she hadn't done in years. She bypassed her assistant and accessed the company's HR database herself. His file was sparse. Leo Vance. Night maintenance staff. Employed for 3 years. Address in a modest, working-class neighborhood across town. An emergency contact listed, Lily Vance. Daughter. A daughter. The single fact humanized him completely. It painted a picture of his weariness, of the quiet strength she had sensed in him. This man wasn't just working through the night for himself. He was doing it for his child. An idea began to form, a deviation from the rigid script of her life. She found the security footage from the previous night. She watched the entire event unfold from the cold, objective eye of the camera. She saw her own panic, a vulnerability she never allowed others to see. Then she saw him. His calm investigation. The confident way he handled his tools. The utter lack of hesitation. He was more than just a janitor. Her curiosity deepened into a strange sort of obsession. She needed to understand what motivated a man like that. She needed to know more. That night, she stayed late again, but this time with a purpose. She waited, her heart beating with a nervous rhythm that was entirely new to her. She found an excuse, leaving a portfolio of papers on a table in a conference room she knew was on his cleaning route. Hours passed. The building emptied. The familiar silence descended. Then, she heard it. The distant, rhythmic squeak of his cart. He entered the conference room, and for a moment, he didn't see her. He was humming a soft tune, a simple lullaby. The sound was so achingly tender in the vast, sterile room that it made Cassandra's breath catch in her throat. He saw her then and stopped, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Ma'am. I thought you'd gone for the night." "I forgot something," she said, gesturing to the portfolio. It felt like a foolishly transparent lie. "I was just leaving," she paused, her calculated plan suddenly feeling clumsy. "I wanted to thank you again. Properly." She held out an envelope. Inside was a check for $10,000. A bonus. A reward. A neat, transactional solution. Leo looked at the envelope, then back at her face. He didn't reach for it. A quiet sadness flickered in his eyes. "I told you, ma'am. That's not necessary." "Please," she insisted, pushing it forward slightly. "Your actions were exemplary. The company wants to reward you." "The company?" he asked, a hint of a wry smile on his lips. "Or you?" The directness of the question disarmed her. "Me," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. He shook his head gently. "I can't take it. I just did what anyone should have done." He met her gaze, and for the first time, she felt truly seen. Not as a CEO, not as a name in the business pages, but as the woman he'd pulled from the dark. "Some things aren't for sale, ma'am." His refusal was not an insult. It was a lesson. It dismantled her understanding of the world, a world where everything and everyone had a price. Stung and confused, she felt the need to reassert the dynamic she understood. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, the question sharper than she intended. "You're one of the executives from the top floor," he said simply. "I'm Cassandra Thorne," she said, letting the name hang in the air between them. "I own this building. This company." She watched his face for the reaction she expected. Shock. Awe. Perhaps regret for refusing the money. He just nodded slowly, his expression unchanging. The revelation didn't seem to matter. "Well, Cassandra Thorne," he said, the name sounding strange and unfamiliar without a corporate title attached to it. "It's a fine building. You should get those elevator relays checked." And with that, he turned to his cart, picked up a spray bottle, and went back to work, leaving her standing there with her envelope and her astonishment. That night, something shifted irrevocably within her. His quiet refusal of her money was a louder statement than any boardroom negotiation she had ever won. He had something she didn't. Something wealth couldn't buy. A core of integrity that was as solid and unyielding as the foundations of the tower itself. She didn't leave. Instead, she pulled up a chair and sat in the quiet conference room, watching him work. He moved with an unhurried efficiency, wiping down surfaces, his mind seemingly miles away. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice softer than she had heard it in years. "Tell me about your daughter," she said. Leo paused, his hand hovering over a tabletop. He turned to look at her, surprised by the personal nature of the question. He saw something different in her eyes now. The icy armor was gone, replaced by a genuine, searching curiosity. So he told her. He spoke of Lily's wild, curly hair, her obsession with drawing unicorns, the way she laughed from her belly. As he spoke, the weariness in his face was replaced by a radiant warmth. The love he had for his child was a physical presence in the room, a light that pushed back against the sterile shadows. "She has her mother's smile," he said, his voice thick with a grief that was still raw. He found himself telling her about Maria, about their dreams, about the illness that had stolen her away too soon. He spoke of his abandoned engineering career, not with bitterness, but with a quiet resignation. Cassandra listened, utterly captivated. His story was one of hardship and love, of dreams broken and remade into something smaller, but perhaps more profound. It was a world away from her own life of inherited wealth and crushing expectation. She, in turn, found herself speaking. She told him about her father, a brilliant but cold man who saw her only as his successor. She spoke of the suffocating loneliness, the feeling of being a ghost in her own life. In the quiet intimacy of the deserted building, with the man who cleaned its floors, she was more honest than she had ever been with her board of directors or her so-called friends. Their conversations became a nightly ritual. She would find reasons to stay, and he would share his break with her. The vast, empty tower, once her prison, transformed into their sanctuary. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about Lily's upcoming school play. She was playing a tree, a role she took with the utmost seriousness. Cassandra found herself smiling, a real, unforced smile. It felt like stretching a muscle she hadn't used in years. One night, she arrived with a small, beautifully illustrated book about constellations. "For Lily," she said, a faint blush on her cheeks. "You mentioned she liked the stars." Leo took the book, his rough fingers tracing the embossed cover. It wasn't an extravagant gift. It was thoughtful. It was perfect. "She'll love this," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "Thank you." In that moment, the chasm between their worlds seemed to vanish. They were just a man and a woman, finding a fragile, unexpected connection in the middle of the night. He saw past the billionaire to the lonely, seeking woman underneath. And she saw in him not a janitor, but a man of immense strength and quiet brilliance. The broken elevator had trapped her for an hour. This man was beginning to free her from a cage she'd been in for a lifetime. The quiet peace of their nocturnal world was destined to be shattered. Marcus Thorne, Cassandra's cousin and a senior vice president in the company, was a man consumed by bitter ambition. He had always resented Cassandra's position, feeling it was his by right. He saw her late nights at the office not as diligence, but as a weakness he could exploit. He began watching her. One night, hidden in a darkened adjacent office, he saw it all. He saw the company's revered, untouchable CEO sitting with a janitor, sharing coffee from a thermos. He saw her laugh, a genuine, unguarded sound he hadn't heard in years. He saw the easy intimacy between them. It was not the scene of a tryst, but in his venomous mind, that's exactly what it became. A weapon. He used his phone to take a grainy, long-distance photo. A picture of Cassandra and Leo, sitting across from each other at the conference table, the skyline glittering behind them. It was an innocent image, but context was everything. He leaked it to a notorious online gossip blog with an anonymous, incendiary tip. The headline broke the next morning, a digital explosion that sent shockwaves through the city's financial district. Billionaire Ice Queen's midnight romance with the help, Cassandra Thorne and the janitor. The story was a toxic cocktail of classism, speculation, and outright lies. It painted Cassandra as unstable and reckless. It painted Leo as a cunning gold digger, a parasite who had latched onto a lonely, powerful woman. The grainy photo was presented as irrefutable proof. The crisis was immediate and brutal. The company's stock dipped. The board called an emergency meeting, their voices a chorus of panic and accusation. The media descended like vultures, camping outside the Thorne Dynamics Tower and, far more cruelly, outside Leo's modest apartment building. For Cassandra, it was a professional nightmare. Her leadership was questioned, her private life dissected with prurient glee. But for Leo, it was a personal hell. He walked Lily to school that morning through a gauntlet of whispering neighbors and the flash of a hidden camera. At school, a classmate taunted Lily, repeating a twisted version of the headline he'd heard his parents discussing. She came home in tears, not understanding the words but feeling their sting. That was the breaking point. The world of wealth and power had crashed into his quiet, protected life like a wrecking ball. He had built a small, safe harbor for his daughter in the wake of their family's tragedy, and now that harbor was being swamped by a toxic tide he could not control. That evening, he went to the tower not for his shift, but to end it. He found Cassandra in her office, her face pale, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and despair. She was on the phone, yelling at a team of lawyers. "I don't care what it costs, I want you to sue them into oblivion." She saw him and hung up, her expression softening with concern. "Leo. I am so sorry. I'm going to fix this." He held up a hand, his face a mask of grim resolve. "You can't," he said, his voice hollow. "This can't be fixed." "Of course it can," she insisted, stepping toward him. "I'll release a statement. We'll crush them." "You don't understand," he said, shaking his head. The chasm between them had reappeared, wider and deeper than ever. "Your world, it breaks things. It broke into my home today. It made my daughter cry. I can't have that. I won't." He placed his company ID and a simple, handwritten letter of resignation on the corner of her cold marble desk. The sight of it felt like a physical blow. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm protecting my daughter," he said, his own voice thick with unshed tears of frustration and helplessness. "It's the only thing I have left to do. Our worlds, they were never meant to mix. I was stupid to think they could." He felt he was failing Lily by staying. He believed he was a danger to her. He saw Cassandra's power not as a shield, but as a spotlight that burned anyone who got too close. She saw his resignation as a rejection. A confirmation of her deepest fear, that she was toxic, that her life, her world, was a cage that would always keep her separate, always keep her alone. He wasn't just leaving a job, he was leaving her. "Leo, please," she begged, the word stripped of all authority. "Don't do this." He couldn't look at her. The pain in her eyes was a mirror of his own. "Goodbye, Cassandra." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the vast, silent office. The sound was a final, terrible punctuation mark on their impossible story. She was alone again. Trapped, not in an elevator, but in the life she was born to. And this time, there was no one to get her out. The days that followed were a blur of frozen misery for Cassandra. The tower once again became her cage, each pane of glass a reminder of the man who had shown her the sky beyond it. She was besieged by her board, by the press, by the crushing weight of her own failure. She had all the power in the world, yet she had been powerless to stop Leo from walking away. She realized with a gut-wrenching certainty that his resignation was not about money or status. It was about honor. It was about a father's love. He had sacrificed the strange, fragile connection they had built to create a shield for his child. He had chosen his world over hers, and she finally understood that he was right to do so. But understanding didn't ease the ache. It amplified it. One evening, sitting alone in her silent office, staring at the book of constellations she had given him for Lily, a new feeling began to burn through the fog of her despair. It was anger. A cold, clear rage. Not at Leo. Not at herself. But at the cruel, cynical world that had twisted something so innocent into something so ugly. She would not let them win. She would not let them define Leo by their sordid narrative. They had attacked his character, the very thing she admired most about him. A display of wealth wouldn't fix this. A lawsuit was just more noise. She had to do something else. She had to use the one tool she had so rarely deployed, her own voice. Her own truth. She called her terrified head of public relations. Schedule a press conference. Tomorrow morning. In the main lobby. What are we going to say, Miss Thorne? The woman asked, her voice trembling. The board advises a firm denial and... I'm not interested in what the board advises, Cassandra cut her off, her voice like ice. Just schedule it. The next morning, the grand lobby of the Thorne Dynamics Tower was a chaotic circus of cameras, microphones, and reporters. The air buzzed with anticipation. The board members stood off to the side, their faces ashen. They expected a damage control speech, a corporate maneuver. Cassandra walked to the podium, not in a severe power suit, but in a simple, soft gray dress. She looked out at the sea of faces, her expression uncharacteristically open and vulnerable. Leo, sitting in his small apartment, watched it on the news. He had been avoiding it, but Lily was at a neighbor's, and he couldn't stop himself. He expected a denial. He expected her to throw him under the bus to save herself. His heart braced for the final, painful blow. Good morning, Cassandra began, her voice steady and clear, broadcast across every news channel in the city. I'm not here today to issue a denial. I am here to tell you the truth. A hush fell over the lobby. The stories you've been writing are wrong. Not because they invent a romance, but because they completely miss the point. You have been persecuting a good and decent man. His name is Leo Vance. Leo stared at the screen, his breath caught in his chest. A few weeks ago, I was trapped in a stalled elevator on the 35th floor of this building. The emergency systems had failed. I was alone, and I was terrified. She paused, letting the admission of fear sink in. Leo Vance, a member of the night maintenance staff, found me. He did not call for help, because he knew the lines were down. He used his own tools and his own ingenuity, and he got me out. He is a skilled engineer who, due to life's hardships, works as a janitor. She looked directly into the main camera, as if speaking only to Leo. He asked for nothing in return. He refused a substantial reward. Because he is a man of integrity. A man of character. The kind of character that is not cultivated in a boardroom, but in the quiet, difficult moments of life. Tears welled in Leo's eyes. She wasn't defending herself. She was defending him. The midnight meetings the tabloids have so gleefully reported were conversations, she continued, her voice ringing with passion. He spoke about his daughter, a little girl he adores. And I spoke about my loneliness. He was not a member of the help, he was my friend. He reminded me that there is warmth and decency in this world, something I had long forgotten inside these glass walls. He resigned his position to protect his child from the poison that you have been printing. He did what any good father would do. And for that, he has my deepest, most profound respect. She took a deep breath, her grand gesture ready. So I will not be suing any news outlet. Instead, effective immediately, Thorne Dynamics is launching the Maria Vance Foundation, named for Leo's late wife. It will be a multi-million-dollar fund dedicated to providing engineering scholarships and family support for our service and maintenance employees. And I have offered the position of director of that foundation to the most qualified man I know, Leo Vance. The lobby erupted in a cacophony of shouted questions and flashing cameras. Cassandra ignored them all. She had said what she needed to say. She had told their story. Her truth. That evening, there was a soft knock on Leo's apartment door. He opened it to find Cassandra standing there. She was without her usual armor of power, looking small and uncertain in the dim hallway light. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. He stepped aside, letting her into the small, clean apartment that was filled with Lily's colorful drawings and the smell of a home-cooked meal. It was the first time she had been there. It was his world. They stood in silence for a moment. "What you did today," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "No one has ever stood up for me like that. They were attacking the best man I've ever met," she said simply, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I couldn't let that stand." The last walls between them crumbled into dust. He saw the incredible courage behind her gesture. She saw the depth of his forgiveness in his eyes. "I'm sorry I walked away," he whispered. "I was scared. I only thought about protecting her. I didn't think about what it would do to you." "You did the right thing," she said, taking a step closer. "You did what a father should. But you don't have to do it alone anymore." He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, and he wrapped them in the warmth of his own. The chasm was closed. Their bond, tested by fire, was now unbreakable. 1 year later. The autumn sun cast a warm, golden glow over the park. Laughter, bright and clear, echoed across the grass. Lily, her hair a wild halo in the sunlight, chased a bright red kite, her squeals of delight a perfect melody. Leo stood watching her, a soft, easy smile on his face. The lines of weariness that had once been etched so deeply around his eyes were gone, replaced by a look of profound peace. He was no longer a ghost haunting the halls of a skyscraper. He was a man living in the light. As director of the Maria Vance Foundation, he had found his purpose again. He was changing lives, using his skills and his empathy to build bridges for people like him, people who had been overlooked. He was an engineer of hope. A hand slipped into his. He looked down and met Cassandra's gaze. Her eyes, once filled with a lonely frost, now held a deep, steady warmth. She was not the ice queen of the business pages. She was Cass, the woman who knew all the names of the constellations, the woman who laughed from her belly when Lily told a silly joke. She had found a new kind of power. Not the power to command, but the power to connect. Together, they had blended his values with her resources, creating a life that was richer than any stock portfolio. They lived not in a sterile penthouse, but in a warm, comfortable house with a small yard, a home filled with the beautiful chaos of family. "It's flying," Cassandra said softly, watching the kite soar against the brilliant blue sky. "You fixed it," Leo replied, squeezing her hand. The kite string had snapped earlier, and she had patiently, carefully helped Lily tie it back together. She leaned her head on his shoulder, a comfortable, familiar gesture. "You taught me how." He looked at her, the woman he loved. The woman who had been trapped in a box of steel and glass. He looked at his daughter, his heart, running free and joyous. He had fixed an elevator. But she, with her brave, defiant act of love, had fixed his life. She had rescued him just as surely as he had rescued her. Together, they watched the kite dance in the wind, two worlds no longer separate, but woven into one beautiful, resilient tapestry. They had found their new beginning, a quiet, extraordinary love story built not on a foundation of wealth or power, but on a simple, unshakable act of kindness in the middle of a cold, stormy night.